Ricky, do you want to take a 10-minute? Okay, we're going to kind of shift gears here a little bit, and we're going to talk about the cost-benefit tests. That it has a positive cost-benefit relationship. In other words, the benefits we receive are greater than the costs that are incurred. Now, there are several different tests that we're going to take a look at. They all measure costs and benefits. So you may ask yourself, well, why do we need more than one test? Why can't we just use one? Well, each test looks at the calculation from a different perspective. For example, one test will look at it from the perspective of a participant. The cost-benefit relationship is different if I'm a participant in the program than if I'm not a participant in the program. Another test will look at it more from a societal perspective. Another one will look at it more from the perspective of the total efficient utilization of resources. So we have different ways of looking at these to measure the cost-benefit, and then we have to see if it passes certain tests. Is that something we want to pursue? Later on this afternoon, when we talk about the model that does this for you, and we'll make a copy of that model available to you. In addition to calculating the benefits and the costs, it also calculates the emission reduction. Okay, remember I talked about the INDC and how the government of the Philippines is going to be trying very hard to meet that international commitment. Now you have to remember that at this point in time, the INDC is kind of a voluntary thing. Okay, the countries all around the world made these intended commitments. But at this point, they're not mandatory. But there is a process where if the INDC is ratified, then it becomes a little more of a commitment. But my view of this is a little bit different. I take more of a political view of it. If you tell the international community you're going to do something, and all the countries did that, somebody somewhere is going to keep score. Somebody somewhere is going to say, U.S., you committed this and you didn't meet it. Or the European Union, you committed this and you didn't make it, or you did make it. So somewhere, somebody, even if these are just voluntary, somebody somewhere is going to be keeping score to find out how close you came. Okay, so the final step of calculating the emissions from the Philippine government's perspective is going to be important. Okay, the first test we're going to look at is called the rate impact test. You know, I found it, I told you DSM has been around for a long time, kind of lost favor for a while. But what I found interesting, remember I told you about the one filing at the ERC, that's Answer Record 2, made back in the late 90s? If you look at the order, they used these same tests to calculate the cost benefit of their program. So, at least for them, this is nothing new. Okay? These tests have been around for quite some time. So the rate impact test, what are the benefits? The benefits are the avoided supply cost. Okay, I don't have to generate a particular number of kilowatt hours anymore, so I avoid that cost. Or that's the benefit, I'm sorry. The benefit is I don't have to buy so much supply. What are the costs? In this particular test, the costs are the cost of the program itself. Say, for example, you were giving out 50% off coupons, or you were given 1,000 peso rebates. That would be the cost of the program. You might have a one-time administrative cost. But this also looks at one of the other costs, which is the potential lost revenue to the distribution utility. Okay? The reason that it includes that is this test is designed, the measure of economics of the DSM program, from the perspective of customers who do not participate. Okay, so this looks at it from someone who did not participate. That's why the only benefit is the avoided supply. Whereas if we were looking at this from the participant's perspective, the reduction in his electric bill would be a benefit. The non-participant, and this is where some of these models you have to realize that they're somewhat generic in nature. Okay, they're saying that this is from the non-participant because of the lost revenue. They're counting that as a cost from the non-participant perspective, which you might say assumes that the utility is going to raise its rates in order to make up the lost revenue. Now, in some jurisdictions, that could happen. Okay, here in the Philippines, you might be able to recover some of your cost. Okay, remember the ERC can grant approval of cost recovery. So assuming you got some level of cost recovery from the ERC, that would be a cost then to the non-participating party, your customers who don't participate. As I said, all of these tests are somewhat generic in nature, but they could be made more specific. And I'll point out areas as we go forward where you could actually take one of these generic tests and customize it so that it fits exactly with your EC, fits exactly with the rate-making scheme that all of you are involved in, the RSEC-WR, which I guess at this point we don't really know where it's going to. Those of you that follow the ERC, consulting company out of, I think they're out of Australia or New Zealand, Castalia, came in and did a study of the RSEC-WR and the categories that you're all in and all the classification. And there was a position paper put out for comment, and the ERC is looking at how to modify the RSEC-WR to hopefully improve it. And there's no doubt it can be improved. It was never meant to be carved in stone. It was meant to be a living document that revised over time. So again, going back to these models, it is something that can be customized. And we'll talk about that in more detail. So we're looking at it from the non-participant. Passing the REM test leads to programs that minimize electric rates. Okay, so if one of your objectives, remember we talked about making sure that we had objectives before we design a program. If one of your objectives is to attempt to lower costs, lower rates, then you would want to make sure that you passed the REM test. Passing the REM test eliminates DSM cross-subsidies. Okay, the DSM cross-subsidy would be between the non-participating customer and the participating customer. It ignores whether a DSM program is in the best interest of the customers who participate. Okay, again, this is totally from the perspective of the non-participant. This test doesn't care whether or not the participant benefits. And it ignores whether a DSM program is good for society. There's no societal aspect to this calculation. Later on, we'll go through what the inputs are to these different models, and you'll see why they come from a different perspective. So the rate impact measure test looks at it from the perspective of a non-participant, and as you might imagine, there's also a participant test that measures the cost-benefit relationship from the perspective of the participant. Now, obviously, the benefits are going to be different. Okay, remember under the non-participant, the rent test, it was only your avoided supply cost that was a benefit. Here, the benefits are the customer's utility bill savings and any other related cost savings, such as reduced operation and maintenance costs. Okay, here you're looking at how this impacts the participant. How much will he save on his power bill? Okay? The cost is the customer's investment to install and maintain, if necessary, the DSM measure. Okay, did the customer have to pay anything? Okay, for example, if the program was to give a 50% off coupon when you bought a LED light, the participant would still have to pay something. He still has to pay the other 50%. So he doesn't get to participate for free. So looking at it from his perspective, he has the benefit that his power bill came down, but it didn't come down for free. He had to pay at least 50% for the light, under my example. So this particular test measures the economics of the DSM program from the perspective of a customer that participates. It ignores the impact on electric rates. Okay, in other words, that 50% half of the coupon that you give to the customer, if you got cost recovery for that from the ERC, this test ignores that. Okay, this test only looks at it from the perspective of a participant. And like the ring test, it ignores the societal impact. There's no societal matter based on the savings. The next one is called the utility test. Okay, we looked at people who don't participate. We looked at people who do participate. Now we're going to look at the DU. What's the cost-benefit scenario with respect to the DU? Okay, it's the same as the RIM, except it ignores lost revenues of the utility and therefore the impact on rates to consumers. Now again, this assumes that there was cost recovery. Because if there is no cost recovery, there is no impact on customers, but there's an impact on you. Okay, so again, we have to put these tests in their right context. And as I said before, if we wanted to customize these tests to fit with your particular rate-setting methodology, we would have to make certain adjustments. It ignores rate impacts and cross-subsidies measured by the RIN test. It leads to cross-subsidies between participants and non-participants, because you can pass this test and still have a subsidy between participants and non-participants. It ignores the participant test, so we don't care that the participants got a benefit. And it measures change in total utility bills due to the program, but not the change in rates. Total resource test. This is kind of like the all-encompassing one. Okay, it looks at everything. Benefits: avoided supply cost, any avoided participant cost aside from the utility bill going down. The cost of the program costs themselves and the participants' cost. So again, the program cost would be, if it's a lighting program, and say the LED light costs 250 pesos, if the utility was paying 50% of that and the participant was paying 50% of it, the two pieces together would be the program cost. This test measures the overall economic efficiency of the demand-side program from the perspective of society. Okay, this doesn't look at it from the participant or the non-participant or the utility, but it looks at it in total. From a total perspective, is there a positive cost-benefit relationship? Measures net cost of DSM based on the total cost of the program, including both participant and utility costs. The other ones maybe only look at the utilities cost or only the participants' cost. This looks at both. Ignores the impact of DSM programs on electric rates by ignoring lost revenue. Leads to cross-subsidies between DSM program participants and non-participants. Measures of the change in the average utility bill across all customers, but does not consider cross-subsidies, nor how many customers are winners and how many are losers. In other words, it ignores the subsidies. It also, I didn't have it on here, but it also does not make sure the impact on society. Which leads me to the societal test. The societal test is basically where we bring in to the equation the environmental or potential environmental and social impact of reducing energy consumption and reducing the generation of kilowatt hours. It starts with the total resource test, okay, which looks at everything, not just the utility, not just the participant, not just the non-participant, but everybody. And it adds to that a hypothetical societal factor. Okay, we call these things externalities. This is going to become an important debate, probably before the ERC. Why do I say that? The people that are working on the INDC, going back to the INDC, all the parties are saying we need the ERC to be involved in this process because the power sector is one of the biggest contributors, therefore the power sector has to be one of the biggest contributors to meeting our INDC. So the ERC has to be involved in it. Now, one of the areas where the ERC has to be involved is helping to identify and redefine what we mean by least cost. How do we define what least cost really means? It's kind of like these same tests. Do we define least cost from the viewpoint of an individual distribution utility? You know, you're considering entering into a power supply agreement with a coal plant, and the coal plant is going to sell you energy for $5.50 a kilowatt hour. And you say, well, you know, I compared that to this biomass plant, and the biomass plant wanted 6 pesos. Or I compared it to a run-of-river hydro. It was going to sell to me at 6 pesos. Is the coal plant least cost? If all you look at are the cost based on the contract, you would come to the conclusion and say, hey, the coal plant is less expensive. But if you define cost from a societal perspective, you say, yeah, but that coal plant is going to have emissions. It's going to make it more difficult for us to comply with our INDC. It's going to add health problems and other environmental damage to our country. And there's a cost associated with that. If we consider the externalities, which becomes an extra cost on the coal plant that doesn't exist on the run-of-river hydro, maybe all of a sudden, even under a definition of least cost, the run-of-river hydro is competitive. So at some point in time, the ERC is going to have to deal with that issue. How do we define cost? Do we include some kind of externality in the evaluation? Because when the ERC, they're required to evaluate all its power supply agreements that are used to serve the captive market. They're required to do things like set the feed rate for the feed eligible RE. All of those things have cost implications to the customer. And then at the same time, they have to make sure that they comply with the provision in the PIRA that says provide least cost service to the captive market. So something to think about for the future. Here's a quick matrix to summarize the benefits and costs that are considered in each one of the models. Okay, we have the 5 models across the top. Different kinds of benefits, the avoided supply cost, reduction in customers' bills, environmental matter, and then we have costs. Direct utility costs, direct customer cost, administrative costs, and lost revenue. So those are all the inputs into the model. Some of them are used in certain tests, some are not. And again, it's all, look at this from a different perspective. Now, why do we need so many different tests? Why can't we have just one? Now remember how these tests are being used. If you look at that order from Zanzareco 2, back in the 1990s, these tests were used to justify their cost recovery. Okay, by showing what the cost-benefit relationship was, this is how they justified, and rightfully so, that's the right way to do it, justify cost recovery. Now, the reason you need so many different tests is the ERC has a responsibility to all the parties. The ERC has an equal responsibility to the participants, an equal responsibility to the non-participants, and an equal responsibility to all of you. And I could add to that an overall responsibility to society in general. So in order for the Commission to exercise its authority and look out for the interests of all those different parties, some of those interests might be competing, the Commission needs that kind of information. And then they can look at the different tests, they can weigh them, decide which one's more important than others, and use that information in rendering their decision. One other thing we have to talk about real quickly in order to understand how these models work is there's a timing difference. There's a timing difference between when the cost is incurred and when the benefits are received. Okay? Some of the costs. Okay, for example, if you're going to have 10,000 participants and you're going to give them free LED lights, okay, you buy 10,000 lights and you hand them out to your customers. Oh, and if you're going to give people new lights, make sure you get something back, because otherwise they'll just have twice as many lights in their house instead of the one you gave them. So that's why most of the lighting programs are an exchange. I'll give you a LED light, you give me an incandescent light. I'll give you a LED light, you give me a CFL. Some type of exchange. So you take something out of the mix, not just add to it. So that cost would be incurred right away. The benefit, though, say that light will last for 9 years, you receive a benefit a little bit every year for 9 years. So there's a mismatch between when the cost is incurred and when the benefits are received. Now, in order to make an apples-to-apples comparison, we have to do something called calculate the net present value. It's actually not as complicated as you might think. Actually, if you're proficient in Excel, Excel will actually calculate the net present value for you. But all it really does is say that a peso today is not the same as a peso tomorrow. Okay, if I give you a peso today, or I give you 50 centavos today and 50 centavos tomorrow, you still have 1 peso, but it's not the same. Now, why is it not the same? Okay, here's my little test for you. You have 2 choices. I can give you 1,000 pesos today, or I can give you 129.5 pesos every year for 10 years. Now, at the end of the 10 years, if you didn't spend any of your money, you'll have 1,295 pesos. Under the second choice, you still only have 1,000, unless you did something with the 1,000. And what net present value does is it recognizes that you could do something with that 1,000. You could put it into a savings account. And it would accumulate interest over those 10 years. So if we assume one of the things you have to consider in a net present value is the discount rate. The discount rate is kind of like the interest you earn in your savings account. So Well, let's add another assumption to the test. You can take the 1,000 peso and put it into a savings account and earn 5%. Which would you rather have? 1,000 pesos today. Oh, by the way, you're not allowed to spend it today. You have to save it. And you can earn 5%, or I give you $129.50 a year for 10 years. How many would rather have the 129 pesos for 10 years? Nobody? Who would rather have the 1,000 pesos? Nobody wants any money at all? Actually, they're mathematically equivalent. Okay? That's the point of this, is that it doesn't make any difference. Assuming you can earn 5%, that's the discount rate that's used. An annual payment of $129.50 is mathematically equivalent to a one-time payment of $1,000. Now, the reason, as I said, the reason we have to do this is because the cost and benefits occur at different points in time. The cost is incurred up front, like the 1,000 pesos. The benefit is like the stream of payments. They happen over time. So if we want to make an accurate, side-by-side, apples-to-apples comparison, we have to go back and calculate the net present value. So all of these tests, when you see the model, you'll see that the comparison between the costs and the benefits is done based on the net present value. Because the model will calculate the annual benefits as opposed to a one-time cost. Okay, so what do we use these tests for? The tests may be used to analyze the cost effectiveness of DSM programs from different stakeholders' perspectives. Tests may be used to screen programs and select those with the most cost effectiveness. Tests may be used to retrospectively assess the cost effectiveness of a program after they have been in the field for several years as part of monitoring and reporting. Remember, Max talked about monitoring. Okay? Initially, when you're screening your tests, when you're screening your different programs, you're going to use these tests to make a guess, an educated guess, but still a guess is which ones are the best ones.